Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of Nanmu November. Today before you we have this, the Nanmu Allosaurus Blade. Now the first thing you probably notice is that this is not the film version of the Allosaurus, and I said in the last two reviews that I usually prefer the film accurate paint jobs. Well, that is true, but the friend who sold me his Nanmu stuff for cheap decided to pick up the more colorful variant. That being said, I can't say I'm disappointed. This color scheme, though not film accurate, is still quite appealing and much more eye-catching in its display. I certainly wouldn't have minded the standard color scheme, but since this one kind of fell into my lap, I really can't complain. There are some variants that I'm completely not interested in, like the green Carno, but this one is still at least enjoyable for me. Alright, now with that little disclaimer out of the way, before we get to the figure we need to talk about the base. This is currently the only Nanmu figure I have that comes with a base, and honestly I think it looks pretty good. Now it's nowhere near as good as the PNSO or Vitae bases in terms of quality, but at least it's not just a lump of plastic. You can see it has got a sandy texture and even features the bones of some unfortunate animal and an ammonite shell tying into the whole sandy aesthetics. Would have been nice to have like a Diplodocus skull or something else to match the bones, but a shell is cool too, I guess. It's well painted, and yeah, for a base, I think it tells a good story. The underside features a reconstruction of the Allosaurus skull, as well as the Nanmu logo and the name of the figure. You can see that mine's a little scuffed up, as I've enjoyed using this model in some toy photography. I think its dynamic pose is very conducive for that sort of thing. Now when it comes to standing this Allosaurus on the base, it really isn't designed all that well, at least mine isn't. I can't really even get it all the way into the imprint, so it just kind of looks like mine is floating a bit, which is kinda awkward. This unsound support leads to another issue, namely this model's tendency to lean. Now there are some photos out there of this thing fresh out of the box and balancing perfectly fine on that one foot without the need of the base, which is quite a feat. It's awesome that Nanmu was able to engineer such a dynamic pose that managed to stand on its own. But when it can't fully settle onto the base, it does tend to droop over time. Those two pegs are there to keep it from doing that, but since it can't really rest on them, you can figure out what happens. This question of leaning could also be an issue without the base. I don't know, I haven't tried to warp the legs back and just let it stand on its own, but I will say the plastic in the ankle feels quite sturdy. Much more sturdy than the plastic in the PNSO legs, which I feel is essential if you're going to have these dynamic poses. So yeah, maybe it's just mine, but the base is somewhat poorly designed. It's a necessary evil, but yeah, I don't know why mine won't sit flush with the imprint. But moving on to the figure itself, at a glance, this is actually a pretty decent rendition of Allosaurus, not just as a JP model, but as the actual animal. Dino Scream said it could easily be interpreted as Allosaurus jimatsuni. I hope I'm saying that right, and I can find myself agreeing with that statement. Now, I'm not saying this is a scientific model by any stretch of the imagination, but it might just be the closest Nanmu has offered so far. So much so that it is actually my personal favorite Allosaurus in my entire collection. Looking at the head, I think the sculpt here is gorgeous. The detail on the face is great, especially the scales on the lower mandible. Those are beautifully rendered, and the dry brushing really brings them to life and makes them pop. The teeth are very fine and pointed, and they're cast in that awesome clear plastic that I love. The jaw is articulated, but it's kind of a dud. For one thing, that's about all the further you can close it, as over time it just kind of bends back to a position it's comfortable with. The same goes for opening the mouth. You can't go too far before it just sort of moves itself back, so not a lot of range of motion on this thing. For whatever reason, the articulated jaws on the two mid-sized theropods I have from Nanmu are both a bit lacking. Still, that doesn't take away from how much I enjoy the look of this Allosaurus. You can see the eye there is done in a fiery red color, and the horns have a display-like orange coloration to them. It feels like they're sitting above the eyes rather than in front of them, which is how I understand the hornlets of Allosaurus to work, but for a model that sells itself as a Jurassic World replica, I guess I can't be too picky. The shrink wrapping is the more glaring issue here, and yeah, it's definitely not good. You can see it's a pretty divoted skull. I can live with that, but I know there are people out there who can't. Going down the length of the body, I love the throat wattle. That splash of red is awesome, and you can see the back of the dinosaur has a sort of crocodilian aesthetic to it. That's something I usually expect to see on a Spinosaurus, so I think it works on an Allosaurus. It's a cool feature. There are scoots running down the back and the rectangular scales that run about a quarter of the way down the flank before transitioning to lovely leathery skin and sagging wrinkles down around the gut there. The wrinkling continues down the length of the tail while the spikes stop about halfway down. Honestly, I don't think the rest of the body is as well handled as the head, but it's still got plenty of detail to bring it to life. It's like the opposite of the Indoraptor now that I think about it. If you don't know what I'm talking about, be sure to watch my review of the Nanmu Indoraptor. The legs of the Allosaurus are quite well muscled, and the movement that's been sculpted into them is very nice. I like how the toes are splayed out under the anchored foot. Really gives this thing a sense of weight as it propels itself forward. Both the toe and hand claws are painted in a dark gray with not a lot of weathering to bring them to life, admittedly. I just noticed something. The toe claws on the Carno are the only one of the Nanmu theropods I currently have to be cast in the translucent plastic. I wonder why that is. I'm sure the rest would look awesome with that too. But back to the Allosaurus. The arms are sculpted with some nice musculature, and the palms even seem to be facing inward, which is a nice touch. Granted, the whole argument about dinosaurs being incapable of pronating their wrist has been somewhat called into question, but I'll still give props to Nanmu for going for a more widely accepted route on this one. Now again, we do have some unfortunate seam lines on the figure, namely on the legs and arms and a little bit in the neck there. They do feel better hidden given the nature of the skin details, but they are still there when you look at it. It is something that is unavoidable on any model. The question is, how well can they be disguised? This one does a valiant job of it, but doesn't quite cut it. As far as the pose on this model goes, I love it. Like I said, it's perfect for toy photography and dioramas, and despite mine's tendency to lean, I still think Nanmu did a great job making sure it was as solid as possible. If this was a PNSO figure, I'm sure it probably would have flopped over by now. I would have had to gum it up to make sure it would stay standing or something. Talking about the specifics of the pose, you can see Blade is mid-stride, turning slightly over his left shoulder, perhaps in pursuit of a young sauropod breakfast. The tail has a bit of an undulation to it as it stretches back and up for balance. It does bear a bit of a resemblance to the W-Dragon Allosaurus, but I guess there's only so much you can do with these running poses, isn't there? As far as the paint scheme goes, I think it's very lovely, vibrant, but not gaudy or overly done. There are some great transitions of color between the cream of the face and the orange of the neck and midsection, and then the purple dorsal coloration coming down onto the legs and hands while striping the body. It all looks pretty great, I must say. The accents of orange on the spikes and nasal horns make for some good breakup. Overall, it's a color scheme I wouldn't have thought works, but it looks like a sunset on a dinosaur, and that's pretty cool if you ask me. As far as the size on this model goes, you're looking at roughly 13 inches long or 33 centimeters, and while standing on the base, the hips come in at around 5 inches off the ground or 12.5 centimeters. For size comparison, here it is with the Nanmu Carnotaurus once again. These figures seem pretty close in terms of size and cost, so hopefully if you have one, you can get an idea of the size of the other. Something I should mention is display compatibility. Here it is with the Nanmu Sinoceratops for another size comparison, and again with the Indoraptor. Overall, I think all of these models look like they belong together, which is great for pieces representing franchise designs. They all look like they walked off the screen together, which is just a lot of fun. Then of course we have Chris Pratt, and again, based off my recollection of Battle at Big Rock and even the size of the real animal, I think the human figures Nanmu includes size up perfectly with this Allosaurus. What are you doing, Chris? That's not a raptor. Holding your hands out like that won't work. Run, you fool! And that was the Nanmu Allosaurus Blade. I definitely dig this one. It's an awesome figure, as Nanmu products often are. The fluid pose, pretty colors, and well done details all come together to create a wonderfully eye-catching and dynamic take on a very popular species. This, like the Carnotaurus, is one of those rare Nanmu offerings that I feel is great for both fans of the JP franchise and just dinosaurs in general. My biggest problem with the model isn't even with the figure itself, but with the base. Any other gripes I have are either small, like the seams, or the scientific nitpicks on a model that really isn't meant to be scientific, but managed to kind of get there. If you're looking to get this figure, I'll leave some links below. It is in that $60 range, but for what it is, it's definitely worth it. As always, I want to know what you guys think of this model. Do you own it? Are you looking to pick it up? What's your favorite Allosaurus model and why? Drop a comment down below, and as always, thank you so much for tuning in to today's review. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope to see you again tomorrow, because we've got some double trouble for you then. Stay tuned, and bye-bye.